Hello, you are listening to the Animalia Hour on KGVM. We are a podcast based in Bozeman, Montana, committed to environmentalism, human health, and redefining our relationship to other animals. We hope through this podcast to inspire you to live vegan for the same reasons. I'm Kevin.
I'm Lucy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah. Thanks for listening. We're going to address a news story today, something that we've been wanting to talk about for a while now. So we're excited to get into our discussion today because it's kind of summer related, I think, because one of the things that happens in the summertime that a lot of people look forward to is the county fair.
Oh, yeah.
So Gallatin County Fair will be getting going in a couple weeks here. And, you know, growing up, I certainly enjoyed going to the fair from a very young age. And I know a lot of, especially youth, enjoy going to the county fair. So this story centers around the Shasta District Fair in Northern California, a news story that we'll be talking about today from a little girl who was involved in the fair last year. And there's a court case pending right now about what happened to her. So I guess today's topic is kind of the intersection between children and animals and the 4-H, which is, I think, the largest national youth organization.
Wow.
Is 4-H. So kind of how children, animals, and how they all come together under the umbrella of 4-H. So yeah, let's start with the children and animals, maybe. Let's start there. The way children are naturally born and their attitudes towards animals. So when you think about maybe your earliest memories as a child around animals, what would you guys say is a child's natural attitude when they are first introduced to animals?
I mean, it's usually a nice, wonderful, cute, warm, friendly environment. Children love little animals. You know, I mean, this is what people do at Easter time, right? They buy their children little baby chicks. It's nice and cute, and everyone's happy. And it's kind of like that idyllic farm scene we're all familiar with from children's books, right? Mm-hmm. It's this, in some ways, it's indoctrination if you compare it to what really happens to farm animals, yeah.
And please don't buy chicks. It's really bad. Like a lot of them die in transit and everything. And hatcheries are horrible. Just side note.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's like that wonder. You see the wonder in the child's eyes when they're first introduced to an animal, especially if it's, you know, a mammal, you know, a furry, cute animal. It reminds me, you know, I think it might have been Gary Yourofsky who says, like, you know, to know what humans naturally feel about animals, including from our youngest months of age, if you take a baby, like a 12-month-old baby, and put her in a crib with a carrot and a rabbit, and he'll say, like, tell me, you know, which one does the child try to eat? And which one does a child try to play with, right? Like, I mean, you know, you could argue, well, babies, that's how they explore their environment, is by putting things in their mouth. So, you know, yeah, of course it's possible that the baby would, you know, put their mouth on the rabbit. That's entirely possible. But, you know, a natural carnivore or omnivore behavior would be for that lion cub or bear cub to, like, actually try to eat, or a cat, you know, even with our own house cats, you know, when they see something smaller than them, they actually try to eat it. And, you know, you don't see that with humans. In fact, you know, I think all of us can remember when we were children and we saw an animal suffering, we saw a dead animal on the side of the road, maybe someone took us fishing, right? Or hunting. Our natural reaction to that, I think universally, is compassion, sadness, sorrow. I can remember distinctly being taken fishing as a child, and when I observed the fish gasping for air, fighting for his or her life, trying to fling its body back into the water. And, the adult that I was with was like, oh, their brains are so tiny. They don't have thoughts. They don't feel pain. Don't feel bad. But, if it makes you feel better, and they picked up a rock and hit the fish really hard on the head so that it stopped gasping. But I think children have this natural compassion for animals and feel great sorrow when they see the animal suffering or being killed. But I think children also have this hardwired trust of our caregivers, the adults in our lives, the authority figures in our lives. And when the adults that a child trusts are telling the child, oh, don't feel bad. This is what animals are for, right? Or they don't feel pain, or whatever the justifications are. We see that children pretty easily are socialized out of this cognitive dissonance. They're able to say, well, I believe everything else you tell me, mommy or daddy, so I'm going to believe you on this. And honestly, it's kind of the easier way, rather than feel this cognitive dissonance and feel this pain inside of me that we're causing this animal suffering. It's a lot easier to trust you and also let myself off the hook that I don't have to feel compassion. I don't have to feel sorrow.
And also not face having an issue in the relationship with the parent, which is really dangerous for a child's psyche, right? Because they need the parent. So if you have such a big difference in morals, for example, and you realize that as a child, it can be very difficult in the relationship and for the child. So
I'm so glad you said that, Lucy. That's really well said, because that's absolutely true. If you think about it from a psychological standpoint, especially with a child's psyche, having that kind of conflict or different opinion or different philosophy than your caregiver, not only is it really difficult for the child, but it would pretty much be impossible to sustain that. And so I think that this is such an interesting topic, is how we take innocent children who naturally have compassion for animals and change them into a person who's been socialized to not have that compassion.
not only that, also desensitizing them so that they don't, it's basically desensitization, what we're talking about. It's like you naturally feel these emotions and these inclinations to help animals, for example, or to stop it from happening, whatever, and not do that to them. But you're just so used to it at some point that you don't even register it.
Right. And that reminds me, when I was discussing this topic with a friend earlier this week, they said, oh, that reminds me of something I read about Hitler. And I did a little bit of my own research, and I found a book by a Dutch sociologist named Abram de Swaan. His book is titled The Killing Compartments. And so it's a book, as I understand it, that really discusses the kind of the perennial question I think a lot of us have. How do you take normal people, who have compassion and love and kindness and, and turn them into a group of people who are desensitized or willing to go to war against, or, willing to kill another group of people, and how just what goes on in the psyche there. So in this book, de Swaan references the fact that Hitler had a policy with the soldiers who wanted to be in the SS. He would have those young men adopt they were given a dog, a German Shepherd, and they would bond with the dog and train the dog and, have a relationship with this dog. But before he would allow them to be accepted into the SS, so like the last step of their SS training was for them, they were ordered to shoot that dog. He writes in his book, let me just find it right here. This training was specifically aimed at numbing any kind of compassion in an almost perverse way, de Swaan says. And I think all of us, we are in this country, we are a part of our social contract in this country is that dogs do matter, and that you are encouraged to have a relationship with a dog. That's completely socially accepted. And many, many people have experienced that deep bond you can have with a dog. They recognize you, they trust you, they're excited when you walk into the room, when you come home, they try to comfort you when you're sick or when you're sad. You play with them, you spend time together. They become a member of the family, they become a friend. And that's, in our culture, that's socially acceptable. So this is another layer of this whole thing that happens with children in this country. For example, you can do whatever you want to the fish or to the chicken or the pig or the cow or the turkey or whatever. Those animals don't have brains. They don't have feelings. This is what children are taught. This is what they are for. They are put here for us to consume or to use for entertainment or whatever. But, be nice to the kitty cat, or, we would never kill and eat our dog, or another layer of dissonance that goes on.
Also, it's interesting because there's like this new trend of having pets that are pigs, like micro pigs, etc. And that there you can see, especially as a vegan, it's very funny to look at how it goes on with people, because like often what happens, I've heard example of people adopting pigs and then they go vegan because they realize they're just like a dog, obviously. And it's very strange. You would adopt a pig for a pet and then eat other pigs, and then you realize it makes no sense, kind of thing. And to me, that just shows very clearly that the difference between dogs and pigs and all these other farmed animals and fish, etc., is that we're not close to them, like we're not exposed to them as much. We're not living in close quarters with them, and so that's why we can't say they are like these other beings that are not like us. But once you're close to them, even a fish, if you observe the fish and how they thrash around to try to get back into the ocean or the lake or whatever, and it's obvious when you really look at the fish that they're suffering. It's what doesn't really make sense is when you try to say, well, they thrash around because it's some random reaction. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And the only reason that we can ever hurt someone else is because we feel disconnected from them. We feel like they're so different that they wouldn't be needed to be, considered because they don't feel the same way or whatever,
Yes, the othering. We other them. Like, okay, there's us. These are the people that we have compassion for. These are the people we don't have compassion for. These are the animals we have compassion for. These are the animals we don't. Like we're able to put things in categories.
Right.
And
what's also interesting to me is I think what we're learning is that a lot of times people become vegan or not harming animals, not necessarily through a lot of the arguments, but through relationships with these animals. I mean, how many people, like you just said, Lucy, but there was another couple that had a pet turkey. And they were cooking their Thanksgiving dinner, right? And the turkey walked up to the oven and kind of looked into the oven, and it struck them like, "What the heck are we doing?" And so they kind of became vegan. And
they were saying to the turkey, like, "Is it the video on social media?"
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah. They were like, "Don't worry, you don't know him." It's such. Yeah. It seems like a joke. It seems funny, but it's actually pretty damn horrific.
Yeah. No, and the same with that with some of the other things we watched, where the guy gets friendly with a cow because somehow he was a farmer, but through the relationship with his cow, he became vegan. And it just reminds me of a quote by a philosopher, Cora Diamond. She noted that mercy is the quality of recognizing the suffering of one over whom we wield power and choosing to treat them with compassion. So that's interesting, that whole, and I think that's what these people are experiencing through this relationship with these animals. So.
Yeah. And before we dive into this particular news story, it does have a lot to do with, or it all happens with the backdrop of 4-H, under the umbrella of 4-H. And so I think it's really worth our while to just spend a few minutes, just a very short amount of time, just kind of going over what is 4-H and a little bit of the history of that organization. So, I didn't even know going into this what the 4-H's are. So they are head, heart, hands, and health. So there's a 4-H pledge where someone who joins 4-H pledges their head to basically greater knowledge, their heart to more loyalty to community mostly, their hands to greater service, and then they pledge their bodies to health. So this is what really shocked me, and I think it's an important piece of this whole story, is I always thought of 4-H as a lot like, YMCA, YWCA, or Campfire Girls, or Boy Scouts, or Girl Scouts. It was just kind of another youth organization that was for the betterment of communities and, giving youth positive skills and socialization. But I learned, to my great surprise, 4-H is very different than those for at least one big reason, but probably many other reasons. So all of those others I named, YMCA, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, those are private, not-for-profit organizations, which are run by, people donating money and people paying dues and fundraisers. 4-H actually is an extension of the federal government. It is completely subsidized by the government. It was founded back in 1914 under Woodrow Wilson. So under the Department of Agriculture, there is an extension of basically these youth clubs, and they were put out and spread all over the country. And the reason why the government felt like this was a good thing to invest in and a necessary thing for our country's survival is back in the very early 20th centuries, the early 1900s, there was a drift to the city of the population. People figured out that I could move to the city, I could move off the farm, move into the city, and earn a lot more money than I'd ever earn on my parents' farm. And so all the best and brightest were moving into the cities, and it was leaving the rural areas in a state of, well, I can just read some of what they wrote. There were worries about depravity, disturbing reports of criminality, venereal disease. The people there were illiterate. And by the way, there was basically no school system for a lot of rural youth at that time in the early 1900s. And so there was even, worries about inbreeding and incest because the youth were so isolated from each other. They didn't have the means of gathering or the time to gather, and so socially lonely and isolated that it led to oftentimes incest. Not to mention depression and things like that. In fact, to the point where during World War I, rural men were disproportionately deemed unfit for military service because of venereal disease. Wow. As compared to the urban men who were enlisting. So the federal government was obviously very concerned about what was going on in the rural America and the fact that, the people growing our food are moving away from the farms. And so over time, they came up with this idea of youth clubs and started the 4-H program. And so the thing I really want to point out at this point is they they quickly realized that these farms were being run, really inefficiently. And they're thinking, this is such a wasted opportunity. We could turn farming into big business. We can apply scientific knowledge and new technologies to farming to increase production. And so they would go to the farms and they would try to talk to the patriarchs, the fathers, like, hey, instead of doing it this way, do it this way. And they found that the father farmers were very resistant. The patriarchs mocked this kind of government intervention as book farming. And so they were very resistant to the government coming in and telling them how they should be farming. And so the government realized, if we really want to make a change, what we got to do is we have to get the children. If we can get the children excited about better ways of farming, more efficient ways of farming, then that's how we'll get change. And so a lot of the controversy in the acceptance of making this a federal extension in Congress, when they were trying to pass the Smith-Lever Act in 1914 to subsidize the 4-H, basically, the controversy was, this is so paternalistic, the fact that federal government agents are going to be going into the farm and telling the kids, don't listen to your dad, don't listen to your mom, the way they're doing this is stupid. Listen to us. We'll show you how to farm right. And so through these programs, through these 4-H clubs, children were given loans to be able to do these 4-H projects. And then when they would take their project to the county fair to be judged, and they would win money or sell their product at auction, if it would, and I'm saying product because it could be an animal, it could be a farmed animal, or it could be, an ear of corn or a jar of preserves, or a sewn dress that if it was. So there's all kinds of things that kids were working on, but when they would win a prize or sell their product, then they could pay back these loans and even have a profit. So through these competitions, it got kids excited about these new ways of farming, and also it got them kind of conditioned to be people who are like very comfortable with taking advice from the government. So I think that that's really fascinating when you think about 4-H. And I think there's a lot of good that has come with 4-H. My own family was involved in 4-H. My oldest sister learned equestrian skills with 4-H. My second oldest sister learned how to make all her own clothes. She sewed all her own clothes. And she also had an animal project. She also raised a steer. And so they did do a lot of good in bringing some pride and some financial support to the farmer. But it was always about how can we do this faster, cheaper, get more profit, which on the face of it sounds really good. But as we know, that capitalist way of looking at everything, including farming, can kind of go amok and can kind of lead to things that we're seeing today with modern farming, which is, like the factory farms, where it's all about, of course, no consideration given to the animal or how much suffering we're putting their bodies through in order to quickly produce the maximum amount of profit or product.
And it's also what you said there too, right? I mean, because there was also that organization similarly called Future Farmers of America, now known as just FFA. And similar idea, right? That the government and the way the government wants to run a business and the way that they commodify animals, the whole business structure, the whole accounting process, everything that we know, even with running the markets, you know what I mean? Like futures, that kind of thing. Like all these different aspects that farmers are aware of in terms of running the whole business of farming, they learned through this product. So in some ways, early on, by hitting the children, it was a form of indoctrination. And now we have this huge industrial farming, CAFOs, all these things. Like it's just led one step, from getting people on board to now we've got these massive factory farms that are just run basically on a capitalist structure and mindset. They're pretty much destroying everything. I think so many people are seeing the catastrophe that is factory farming, and now you're seeing this trend back to what some are calling regenerative farming, more of a holistic, organic model of farming, letting the animals till the land, and giving more space for the animals, even though that still has its own problems in terms of ecological problems and climate problems.
And yeah, not to say that we're saying that there's a small farm, local, humane way to kill and export animals. That's fine. Like as vegans, obviously, we believe that animals should have the right to live, to not be commodified, to not be exploited, to name it. So this is not like we're not just trying to say that factory farming is the problem. It's part of the problem. It's a big problem, but we're saying that also, all exploitation, all commodification, all unnecessarily killing of animals is part of the problem. Just a little side note.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's capitalism run amok is what it is. I mean, honestly, factory farming, it's like capitalism to the nth degree.
Well, it's when you take this idea of speciesism to the capitalist end,
right.
Like it's already wrong in as a small farm kind of thing. It's already wrong. Right. Hunting is wrong if you don't need it to survive and stuff like this.
Exactly.
But when you take it to the capitalistic end of things, that's what you get. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That reminds me. I'm really glad you said that because when I was doing all this reading and research about the history of 4-H and how government agents were so frustrated with the traditional farmer for being so inefficient, and the farmers were resistant, like, no, I don't want to adopt the practices you're preaching. I actually thought, I wonder if back in the early 1900s, the traditional farmer was a little bit more humane and did see the animals as individuals a little bit more and didn't want to just see them as, like, this cow doesn't produce as much milk, I'll send her to slaughter. That max efficiency mindset was repulsive to them on some level. And I just wonder if that was part of the resistance from the traditional farmer.
That can be.
And I feel like in some way, the fact that factory farms are happening and people are, like, pretty much everyone is opposed to that. It's interesting because not all people are opposed to humane kind of local farms, exploitation and killing of animals, etc. But when you think about it, how is like is it better to treat someone well and to bond with them and then betray them and kill them and right. I mean, artificially inseminate them, take their babies away, or is it like which one is better, and is it really better? You know what I mean? Like, would you feel better if you were killed by someone if you had been treated well and then betrayed? Or, does it really matter?
No, I think it gets into what we want to talk about. Well, I think we'll get into in this episode is this cognitive dissonance in our society, in our culture, kind of what we've already been talking about, that it's acceptable. And like if you went outside and kicked somebody's dog, there'd be a real issue. But, we go ahead and kill animals, quote unquote, air quotes, humanely. I just think it's fascinating. Like our culture has created this cognitive dissonance, and we find it acceptable.
All cultures, almost.
That may be, yeah.
So knowing a little bit about the history of 4-H, that it is a government entity that even today, and by the way, they are based out of land grant colleges. So right here in Bozeman, Montana State University is a land grant college, and it has its own 4-H agents who are government employees running 4-H. So knowing that, number one, it's definitely about the commodification, the maximum intensive efficiency of commodifying animals, number one. And number two, from the very beginning, 4-H was about helping children maybe, I don't know, pay less attention to their parents and more attention to the government agents, kind of usurping the parental role with farm children a little bit. So that's kind of their heritage. So I think with that backdrop, we should kind of jump into this particular news story.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and just start it.
Go for it.
But yeah, everybody can definitely jump in
Absolutely.
as we go. So in Northern California, in Shasta County, there was a 9-year-old girl, 9 years old when this happened last fall. And I just like to mention, I know when we think California, we think Hollywood and LA, but actually California is still the largest producer of agriculture. So there's a lot of rural areas. There's a lot of farm areas in California, especially Northern California, I think. But maybe that's not true. Maybe it's the whole state. So this little girl was in 4-H, and she decided to do one of the animal projects. And to do that, you have to sign a contract. The little girl had to sign a contract, and interestingly, in bold-faced letters on the 4-H animal contract, it says that you will subject this animal to a terminal sale, and it says no exceptions! Exclamation point! Several exclamation points. So, so the little girl who's being referred to as EL, I think that's just her initials, to protect her privacy. She and her mom certainly saw this contract, signed this contract, probably knew exactly what they were getting into, that she would have this animal that would then be ultimately auctioned off and slaughtered. So they knew that going in. So they got a goat, a little male goat, and she named him Cedar. So I want to point that out too right now. Like the fact that these aren't just nameless farmed animals. When 4-H does this project, they have a child adopt one specific animal and the children name them. And I think that that's significant because when we give a name to an animal, it's kind of acknowledging that this animal's someone. So she named him Cedar, and of course, natural. This is not surprising at all. I think this happens to most of the kids who go through this. She bonded with the goat and became friends with the goat. The goat became part of the family. She fell in love with Cedar and took him to the Shasta County Fair and started to really come to terms with the fact that Cedar's life was going to be ending imminently. And this really started to upset the daughter, and she expressed this to her mom, and they tried to get out of having to go to auction. They requested, can we please not have this animal auctioned? And
also the girl had been going through some hardships. The whole family she lost 3 grandparents around the same time of the same year. So she's already dealing with some hardships, and then she was like, just having to suffer one more loss. She just didn't want to. So that was part of it.
So they request to get out of the auction. They're told, no, you're bound to auction this animal off. So they go to the auction, and a state senator, one of the California state senators, his last name is, I don't know how to pronounce it, Dahle, Brian Dahle or something like that. He bid on the animal and was the highest bidder. And here I'd like to point out these 4-H auctions their whole or one of their main intents is to get youth excited about growing up and being a farmer. And so people come to these auctions knowing that they're going to pay well above market value on these animals. So like in the real market, a little goat like this might only be sold for, less than $300 for sure. But the high bidder, what he actually bid to pay for this animal was $902.
Yeah.
And I think that helps. It definitely helps with this socialization when the child, and there's no shortage of photographs and videos online of these 4-H kids sobbing and weeping at these auctions and hugging their animals and, just devastated as they as they have to say goodbye to this animal and watch it being led onto a truck to go to slaughter. But again, it's like it's all part of this toughening up culture. Like, oh, it's sad. It's really sad. But this is you're doing such a good job. You're so responsible. Now you know where our food comes from, and this is just the way it is. And
sweet, I know where our food comes from.
Right? Like, this is how we feed the world. This is our proud heritage, and it's almost like a rite of initiation that like. Yeah, it's almost like hazing or something that like this is something that you go through and it toughens you up. But look, someone hands you a check for $900. And this is for like a tiny little goat. I mean, I can't even imagine the prices on, the larger animals. So take it to the auction. It's bid on. And I think at this point in this story, the mom has empathy for her daughter, and they take the goat and they leave. They take the goat and they leave the farm and they go home. And they start getting verbal and written correspondence from the fair. Actually, let me back up. I think what happened next is the mom reached out to the buyer, to the senator's office, and said, explain the situation. And the senator's office is like, oh, yeah, absolutely. Forget it. You don't have to sell me your goat. Like no money had changed hands. And so he was like, fine, I'll keep my money. You keep the goat. So at that point, this little girl clearly is the rightful owner of the goat. So everything was fine in terms of like there was no property dispute at this point until the fair officials found out that they had taken the goat and left. And so they reached out to the mom, and the mom explained the situation and said, I am more than willing to pay you the commission that you would have received for the auction of this animal, plus any other expenses, any other losses that you've incurred because of this. I'm more than happy to make you whole. And they said, no, it's not about the money. This is about teaching our children responsibility. And if we give an exception to your daughter, everything falls apart basically. So they threatened the mom with felony theft, which is very scary.
That's really crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean
she offered to pay, and yeah,
exactly. She's saying, "Let me make you whole," and they said, "No, we're going to call the cops, and you're going to be charged with felony theft, and you're being threatened this by a government official, basically." I mean, it's terrifying. So they take the goat and put it in a sanctuary, like several miles away, in an attempt to keep the goat safe. And then a couple weeks later, under the cover of darkness, literally, cops came, the sheriff's deputies came. They had traveled, so round trip, I guess the estimation is they spent who knows how much money traveling 500 miles round trip to seize this goat. So they got a search warrant at 6:30 p.m. and traveled during the night and arrived with a search warrant that basically allowed them to breach doorways. So they came with battering rams and, very scary stuff.
Like they're terrorists or something.
Yeah.
Big threats to the country.
Yeah, like major criminals. The goat was not at the address listed on the warrant. So they traveled to where the goat really was. So there's a problem right there that they didn't even take the goat from the address that was listed on the warrant. The sheriff's deputies claim that the person at the residence where the goat actually was gave them permission to take the goat. So to get around the fact that they didn't really follow the warrant. So they took the goat, and according to news sources, the goat was slaughtered and the next day served at a community barbecue. So sadly for the little girl and for Cedar, the story ends in a way that is kind of irreparable. There's no way that they can really get justice now at this point.
Right, and as we'll learn if you read about the story, you find that law enforcement just did not follow the proper process, that this girl's rights were violated. There are so many problems with the state of California in terms of the laws in California and how the law enforcement, the sheriffs of, what is it, county?
Shasta County.
Shasta County sheriffs violated her rights, her property rights, violated due process, and same with the fair officials. And so what we find is now there's a lawsuit against them for these various violations of the law, also the girl's civil rights, right? There are at least 3 civil rights violations potentially.
Right, because of that, because they violated her constitutional and civil rights, it is a federal case that is being brought. So
that is so crazy. Seems like a massive overreaction is what happened.
Yeah.
They could have solved this problem much more easily.
Making an example.
That's what it seems like.
Exactly. So, this was just a simple civil property dispute, a claims dispute, basically. And that's never a case for law enforcement. That's always a case for the courts. And so
it wasn't a criminal. There wasn't a criminal issue.
Right. So the proper way to proceed would have been to go to a judge and say, we have this property dispute. You need to sort this out. And they should have allowed Cedar to be wherever he was, or at most take him, seize him, and then hold him, since he is the property in dispute.
Right, and that's part of the due process that they violated. That whenever there's evidence or property in a situation, they need to seize the property and hold it until the whole process has been adjudicated. But what they did is they took the property and killed it and sent it to a barbecue. So they violated her due process and their own laws, which is kind of fascinating.
Right. Right. So I guess if there's any silver lining or anything that's heartening about the story, it's that little girls can get attorneys.
That's awesome.
And there is recourse, and that, because of things like the 1983 federal statute that people can sue their state and local governments, that, especially when you're taking an action under a badge, like the fact that you're working for a government entity, like you should be held to a higher standard in terms of how you choose to deal with a situation, not a lower standard. So yeah, I mean, this case is still in the early stages, but I can't wait to see
the results,
how it goes and what's decided, because it could be a groundbreaking case.
Right.
And also something that's interesting is the public's reaction to it. Like this
Right.
is a huge, like it's made the news. I mean, this is like, would it have been the case in the past? Is it something because we're talking so much about animals' rights or animal welfare these days that it's so
Right.
much in the public's awareness that, and it's so interesting. Like I read this article that you sent me, Sarah, about it, and they were mentioning, like it's interesting how you have a very specific relationship to a pet and a very specific relationship to the property that are farmed animals or fish, for example. And when it gets blurry like it does in 4-H, you don't know what to do and you don't know what to think anymore. Either you see it in a property kind of like it's just property, or it's just a pet. So, there's
Right.
not really a middle ground here, because either they get like treated as a property, or they're like treated as a pet, which is with care and dignity, and they have protection, like legal protection. So it's very interesting to see the cognitive dissonance happening in the public between the people who see that goat as a pet and the people who are like, no, that's basically an object. We can do whatever we want to them.
Well, and it's also, it seems that membership in 4-H is waning, and 4-H is very interested in keep maintaining their membership. And it seems like this particular case is giving them bad publicity, bad press. So it'll be interesting to see what the results may be. But are we going to talk about some of the other laws that were violated? I mean, one of them, I know her lawyer talks about at least 3 civil rights violations, including her right to her own free speech viewpoint. That so violation of her First Amendment rights, her Fourth Amendment because her property was illegally seized, right? And then her 14th Amendment rights were violated, which is
It's another property, basically depriving someone of their property, right?
right.
So the First Amendment viewpoint discrimination and retaliation, basically, they were mad that she has a different viewpoint. And they were like, no, our social contract says this is the viewpoint you should have, and we're going to force that viewpoint and kidnap him and kill him. Interestingly, that you brought up social media, Lucy, because the lawyer contends that it was actually some of the outcry on social media before they even came and seized the goat. This was already kind of circulating in terms of what was going on with this little girl, and the fact that they were getting threatened with having the cops called on them and stuff. The lawyer contends that the defendants saw that kind of social media outrage,
Right.
and were so inflamed by it that that's kind of what motivated them to seek retaliation.
Interesting. Yeah, so one of the issues is retaliation, which is kind of crazy because now it's going to backfire on them. But I mean, the thing about law enforcement too, right? They're part of the political apparatus of a government. And sometimes, we might want to even call them stormtroopers, people who, an argument against people who might not be so happy with the law enforcement is that, well, who are you going to call when you're in a real situation? Well, they have no special duty to help individuals. They're here to push the agenda of the state. And in this particular case, the county fair was part of the state.
That reminds me of when there's always civil disobedience, and actually not about that, but like when there are peaceful protests, which is like, I believe a constitutional right? Like peaceful protests, like the right to free speech, and then you
Assemble,
get threatened of like being arrested for exercising that right.
Right.
Yeah, before, I know we're starting to get towards the end of the hour. So I did want to quote Coulter Ellis. He is in one of these articles. I think this was the Vox article.
He also happens to be a professor at Montana State University. We might have to get him. We just learned this. So we might need to get him on this podcast if he's willing.
Yay. So sociologist Coulter Ellis and Leslie Irvine have argued that 4-H's livestock projects implicitly teach young people how to manage the emotional dissonance that can result from sending a beloved companion animal to a grisly fate. The program's cognitive and emotional socialization is consistent with broader strategies deployed in animal agriculture to justify what many workers may experience as the disturbing and even traumatic labor of slaughter. Ellis contends livestock projects systematically undercut and confound the basic moral intuitions youthful participants like Long's daughter start with, teaching them that it's natural and right to lovingly care for an animal companion and then slaughter it and sell it as meat for a tidy profit. Learning that lesson is key to participating in commercial livestock farming at any scale, whether on a local or factory farm, since the grinding imperatives of long-term profit and contractual obligation must ultimately trump childish sentimentalism for small and large farmers alike. The cultural code in farm communities dictates that children must behave as though animals are commodities and avoid challenging social norms shaped by agriculture, or be prepared to be treated as pariahs. And he goes on, the fact that they had the nerve to suggest that animals may deserve mercy and that the people who raised them might not want them killed, this family broke a social contract, a rupture that is apparent in the mother's correspondence with the county fair officials. And then just to finish up here, animals are supposed to be treated, according to 4-H, right, and this meat culture, animals are to be treated as abstract and fungible, as indistinguishable from one another as one cellophane-wrapped steak is from the next. If an exception is made to spare one animal's life, the whole ideology is undermined.
Wow. There you go.
And go ahead, Lucy.
It just makes me think about the fact, like, imagine if you're teaching a child that it's okay to love a being and do this to them, because like you can love them and send them to slaughter. You can love them and commodify them and exploit them. Imagine what that does to your psyche, and what that does to your view of relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little disturbing.
No, it's massively disturbing. But that right there is exactly it. If they start making exceptions, I mean, 4-H starts to lose its whole, like, what it's based on, right? And this whole, what you referred to as emotional dissonance, right? Like everyone says, oh, it's part of life, it's part of the process. We socialize children we kind of desocialize them to not, they get to know this animal, then we desocialize them and say, well, they're a commodity, we need to sell them. It's just a part of life, and you need to accept this. And here, by the way, here's a check for $900, right?
I think it's gonna make you feel better. It seems like it feels like this reaction is out of proportion, maybe because we don't see it as a threat. It's like just one little girl, like
right.
just one kid. Like there's a bunch of them, but
right.
but if you legitimize this one like tiny little incident,
right.
it's a massive threat to a whole ideology, a whole paradigm.
Absolutely.
And so it is a massive threat. It's actually huge for.
Well, and it's interesting too. We needed to, I know we're running out of time, but one of the things we need to talk about is, I guess, in the state of California, and this is true of minors in many states, because they might not have the full capacity to make a really good decision, they are allowed to get out of a contract that they might sign. In this particular case, EL signed a contract with 4-H, and because she's a minor, she can disaffirm the contract. And so what's so ironic about it is that she was the owner. She bought the animal. She was the owner of the animal at the beginning, through the fair, and when her and her mom absconded the animal to a farm sanctuary or to an animal sanctuary, they were still the owners of it. But then the fair tried to turn it and threaten them with a felony grand theft, when in fact they were the owners. So it's like the state was trying to almost manipulate them, coerce them, which is what the state is really good at doing. And this is what we're finding in a lot of animal agriculture. We need to have a whole show on this, where the new domestic terrorists are the animal ag.
What is it? Ag laws. Ag laws. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I don't know, if there is any reaction in favor of what 4-H did in this case, it might even come from people who've been through the 4-H program and who remember what it's like to bond with an animal and watch them go to slaughter. And, they may even have done that several years of their childhood. And I'm sure they're thinking, yeah, I wanted to back out of my contract too.
Right.
I didn't want my animal to go to slaughter either, but I was forced to. I was put under so much social pressure
Right.
to go through with it, that this isn't fair.
Well,
And I think
Right.
4-H makes these kids believe that this is a legally binding contract. There's no exit. There's no way to get out of it, when that's really not true.
It's not true, and it's coercion is what it is. And it's also the story of Charlotte's Web, everyone's favorite little story, right, that we all know and have read.
So like when we were talking about the history of 4-H, and I kind of drew out two things. One, 4-H values the maximum efficiency of commodifying animals, right? And that's like their highest value. And the second thing was that from their beginning, 4-H has always been an organization that kind of usurped parental authority. So if you look at both of those things, they play such a major role in this case. First of all, we cannot allow any exceptions to an animal being slaughtered. This animal is destined for slaughter, and there cannot be any exception to that. And secondly, we know better what's good for this girl than the mother does.
Right.
We are trying to teach her responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to force that, even if the mother of the child is saying, no, this is not what's best for my child.
Right.
So I think that's fascinating.
It is fascinating. But the good news is that there are compassionate, ethical alternatives to 4-H and Future Farmers America. There's an organization called LEAP, Leaders for Ethics, Animals, and the Planet. And so you can look into that. Check out their website. It's leapforanimals.org if you want to find an alternative where you can learn about agriculture. You can learn about all the cool things that help, make a great society, but also with the values that we all talk about: peace, nonviolence, compassion, all of those things. And you can learn about agriculture in the process. So LEAP.
So we want to let you know a little bit. We have a vegan potluck coming up. It will be on June 30th, which is a Friday. It will be at Lindley Park Center. So it's near the pavilion, and we will have a vegan potluck from 6 to 8. You don't have to be vegan to come, of course. Everybody is very much welcome. Just bring a vegan dish, and we'd love to have you there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for listening. And until next time, this is the Animalia Hour.
Bye, everybody.